How did I overcome losing everything? What happened next was unbelievable. The eviction notice trembled in Sarah's hands as she stood in the doorway of what had been her home for 3 years. The crisp October wind in downtown Denver cut through her thin sweater, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and the distant hum of rush-hour traffic. Her neighbors averted their eyes as they passed, their footsteps echoing against the brick walls of the apartment complex. 30 days, she whispered, reading the bold letters again. But 30 days had already passed. The sheriff would be here tomorrow. Inside, cardboard boxes sat half-packed around her sparse living room. The television she'd saved months to buy was already gone, sold last week for grocery money that had run out 3 days ago. The walls, once decorated with photos of happier times, now bore only the faded rectangles where frames used to hang. Sarah's phone buzzed with another call from an unknown number. Debt collectors had become her most frequent callers. She let it go to voicemail, knowing she couldn't bear to hear another threat wrapped in professional courtesy. "Mom, I'm scared," came a small voice from the hallway. 8-year-old Emma stood there clutching her worn stuffed rabbit, her dark eyes wide with the kind of worry no child should carry. Sarah forced a smile she didn't feel. "We're going to be okay, sweetheart. Remember what I always tell you, that you'll always take care of me," Emma replied, but her voice wavered with uncertainty. The words felt like lies now. Sarah had been a marketing coordinator at a tech startup until the company folded 6 months ago. Her savings had evaporated paying rent and Emma's school expenses. Her parents had passed away years ago, and her sister in California was struggling with her own family's finances after her husband's accident. As Sarah tucked Emma into bed that night in their empty bedroom, she stared out the window at the Denver skyline. The city lights blurred through her tears. Tomorrow, they would join the growing number of homeless families in America. She had exactly $47 in her checking account and nowhere to turn. "God," she whispered into the darkness, "if you're there, I need a miracle." The shelter smelled of industrial disinfectant and desperation. Sarah gripped Emma's hand tightly as they entered the women and children's haven on the outskirts of Denver. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on the worn linoleum floors, and the sound of crying children echoed from somewhere down the hall. "Welcome," said Maria, the intake coordinator, her voice gentle but tired. She'd clearly seen hundreds of families like Sarah's. "I know this is difficult, but you're safe here." Their assigned space was a corner of a large room divided by hanging sheets. 2 narrow cots sat side by side, with a small plastic bin for their belongings. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she looked around at the other families, mothers holding babies, children doing homework on the floor, women staring at nothing with hollow expressions. "It's temporary," Sarah whispered to Emma, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. The days blurred together. Sarah spent hours at the shelter's computer, applying for jobs and housing assistance. Their responses were always the same: overqualified, underqualified, insufficient credit history, too many applicants. Her professional clothes hung loose on her shrinking frame. The stress had stolen her appetite, but she made sure Emma ate first at every meal. "Mama, when are we going home?" Emma asked on their 5th night, her voice muffled against Sarah's shoulder. "Soon, baby. I promise." Another lie that tasted bitter in Sarah's mouth. The job placement center. Sarah sat across from Mrs. Peterson, a caseworker with kind eyes and calloused hands. "Your background is impressive, Sarah. Marketing coordinator, bachelor's degree, excellent references. But the market is tough right now, especially for someone with a gap in employment." "I'll take anything," Sarah said, hating the desperation in her voice. "Retail, food service, cleaning, anything. The problem is childcare. Most entry-level positions require evening or weekend hours, and you'd need to arrange care for Emma." Sarah's heart sank. Childcare cost money she didn't have, and she couldn't leave Emma alone. It was a trap with no apparent escape. That evening, as Sarah watched Emma sleep on the narrow cot, she pulled out the notebook where she'd been writing, a habit from childhood that had returned in her darkest moments. The words flowed like tears onto the page, stories of loss, fear, and the crushing weight of feeling invisible in a world that had forgotten her. She didn't know that across town, Someone was about to change everything. The Denver Public Library had become Sarah's sanctuary. In the quiet corner near the windows, she could pretend normalcy while Emma did her homework and Sarah searched for jobs online. The librarians had grown familiar with their daily presence, offering gentle smiles and occasional help finding resources. On a gray Thursday morning, Sarah noticed a woman at the table across from them. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and wearing a beautifully tailored coat that spoke of comfort Sarah hadn't known in months. The woman seemed to be observing Emma, who was struggling with her math homework. "Excuse me," the woman said, approaching their table. "I'm Catherine. I couldn't help but notice your daughter working so diligently. Is she having trouble with those fractions?" Sarah tensed, protective instincts flaring. "She's fine, thank you." But Emma looked up with curious eyes. "I don't understand why you flipped the second number." Catherine smiled warmly. "May I?" She gestured to the empty chair, and something in her manner made Sarah nod reluctantly. For the next 20 minutes, Catherine worked with Emma, explaining fractions with patience and creativity that would have made any teacher proud. She used torn paper pieces as visual aids, turning the lesson into a game. Emma's frustrated frown gradually transformed into understanding, then delight. "You're a very smart girl," Catherine told Emma. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As Catherine prepared to leave, she turned to Sarah. "I'm here most mornings, if Emma ever needs help with homework again." She paused, studying Sarah's face. "Are you a writer?" The question caught Sarah off guard. What makes you ask?" "The way you were watching, taking mental notes. And that notebook, I recognized the look of someone who processes the world through words." Sarah's cheeks flushed. "I used to write before." She gestured vaguely, unable to name all that she'd lost. "Before life got in the way," Catherine finished gently. "I understand. I'm Catherine Walsh, by the way. I own a small publishing company here in Denver, Walsh Literary Press." Sarah's heart skipped. She'd heard of Walsh Literary. They published literary fiction and memoirs, books she'd dreamed of writing someday when life was stable and dreams felt possible. "Here's my card," Catherine said, pressing the elegant cardstock into Sarah's palm. "If you ever want to talk about writing, call me." That night in the shelter, Sarah stared at the card under the dim overhead light. Emma was already asleep, curled around her stuffed rabbit. Around them, the sounds of other families settling in for another night of temporary existence filled the air. Sarah opened her notebook and began to write, her pen moving faster than it had in months. She wrote about loss and fear, but also about Emma's resilience, about the unexpected kindness of strangers, about the way hope could flicker even in the darkest places. She didn't know it yet, but those words would change everything. 3 weeks passed before Sarah gathered the courage to call Catherine. She stood outside a coffee shop in downtown Denver, her hands shaking as she dialed. The October air was sharp, and early snow dusted the sidewalks. "Catherine Walsh speaking. This is Sarah, from the library. You gave me your card, Sarah. I'm so glad you called. Would you like to meet for coffee? There's a lovely place called Beacon Books and Brew on 16th Street. 30 minutes later, Sarah sat across from Catherine in the warm, book-lined cafe. The smell of roasted coffee and old paper enveloped them, creating a cocoon of possibilities Sarah hadn't felt in months. "I brought some of my writing," Sarah said, sliding a manila folder across the small table. "I know you're busy, and I understand if Sarah," Catherine interrupted gently. "Breathe. I asked to see your work because I sensed something special about you. Trust me. I've been in this business for 30 years. Catherine opened the folder and began reading Sarah's handwritten pages. Her expression was unreadable, but Sarah noticed she didn't skim. She read every word carefully. Outside, Denver's afternoon rush began, but inside their corner booth, time seemed suspended. "These are remarkable," Catherine finally said, looking up with tears in her eyes. "Your voice is authentic, raw, beautiful. This piece about Emma learning fractions while living in a shelter, it's heartbreaking and hopeful simultaneously." Sarah's throat tightened. "It's just our life right now. That's exactly what makes it powerful. People need to read stories like this." Real stories about real struggles and the resilience of the human spirit. Catherine leaned forward. I'd like to offer you something. Sarah's heart pounded. There's a small apartment above my press office. It's nothing fancy, one bedroom, basic kitchen, but it's empty and it's safe. I also need someone to help with manuscript editing and administrative work. The pay isn't much, but it would cover your basic expenses and give you time to write. The words seemed impossible. I don't understand. Why would you? Because I believe in your talent. And because everyone deserves a chance to rebuild. Catherine's eyes were firm with conviction. But also because I'm a businesswoman. I think this story you're living right now, could become something extraordinary. A memoir that could help other people facing similar struggles. Sarah felt dizzy. You want me to write about all of this? I want you to write about surviving it, about what comes next, about how we find our way back to hope. That evening, Sarah sat on Emma's cot in the shelter, watching her daughter color in a donated coloring book. Around them, the familiar sounds of institutional life continued, conversations in multiple languages, children playing, mothers comforting crying babies. Mama, Emma said without looking up from her careful coloring. That nice lady from the library, she wants to help us, doesn't she? Sarah marveled at her daughter's intuition. Maybe, sweetheart. Would you like that? Emma nodded solemnly. I liked her. She made fractions make sense. 2 days later, Sarah and Emma stood outside a narrow brownstone building in Denver's Capitol Hill neighborhood. Catherine waited with keys in hand and a smile that felt like sunrise after the longest night. Welcome home, she said. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating hardwood floors that creaked with character rather than neglect. Emma ran from room to room, her footsteps echoing in the empty spaces, her laughter the first sound of joy Sarah had heard in months. Look, Mama, Emma called from the bedroom. We each get our own bed. 2 twin beds sat against opposite walls, donated furniture from Catherine's church congregation. Simple but clean, with colorful quilts that volunteers had made. A small desk sat near the window, perfect for homework and Sarah hoped for writing. The office is downstairs, Catherine explained, leading them down a narrow staircase. Walsh Literary Press isn't large, just me, my part-time designer Marcus, and now you. But we publish beautiful books. The office occupied the first floor of the brownstone. Bookcases lined every wall, filled with titles Sarah recognized and many she didn't. A large oak desk dominated one corner, covered with manuscripts and galley proofs. The air smelled of paper and ink, the perfume of possibility. Your desk is here, Catherine said, indicating a smaller workspace near a window overlooking the tree-lined street. I'll need help with manuscript preparation, correspondence, and basic administrative tasks. But I also want you to have time to write your story. Sarah's first week blurred past in a haze of learning new routines. She walked Emma to the local elementary school each morning, marveling at how quickly her daughter adapted. Emma had always been resilient, but seeing her make friends and laugh at recess filled Sarah with gratitude so fierce it was almost painful. At the office, Sarah threw herself into the work. She proofread manuscripts, formatted documents, answered phones, and slowly learned the intricate dance of bringing books to life. Marcus, the designer, was a lanky 20-something with purple hair and an infectious enthusiasm for typography. You're picking this up fast, he told Sarah after she successfully formatted her first complete manuscript. Most people take weeks to understand layout specifications. I'm motivated, Sarah replied, and she meant it. Every task completed, every small success, felt like building blocks toward a future she was beginning to believe in again. In the evenings, after Emma finished her homework, Sarah wrote. She wrote about the shelter, about the job interviews that led nowhere, about the crushing weight of watching your child worry about adult problems. But she also wrote about Catherine's unexpected kindness, about Emma's strength, about the way hope could grow in the smallest spaces. What are you writing about, Mama? Emma asked one night, curling up beside Sarah at the desk. About us, Sarah said simply. About how we got here and where we might go. Emma considered this seriously. Are you writing about how scared I was? Sarah's heart clenched. A little. Is that okay? Yeah? Emma nodded. Maybe it will help other kids who are scared too. At that moment, Sarah understood what Catherine had seen, the possibility that their story could become something larger than their own experience. A bridge between despair and hope for others. Walking similar paths outside their window, Denver's evening lights twinkled like promises. 3 months into their new life, Sarah had settled into rhythms she'd forgotten were possible. Morning coffee while Emma got ready for school, walking together through neighborhoods where autumn was giving way to winter, the comfortable routine of work that felt meaningful rather than desperate. At T. Walsh Literary Press, Sarah had become indispensable. She edited with a sharp eye, handled correspondence with diplomatic skill, and brought fresh perspective to manuscript evaluations. Catherine had begun asking for her opinions on submission letters, trusting her instincts about which stories resonated. "You have an editor's eye," Catherine told her one December morning as they reviewed a memoir about addiction recovery. "You understand what makes a story authentic versus what makes it merely dramatic." Sarah looked up from the manuscript. She'd been annotating. This author, she's not telling the whole truth about her family's reaction to her recovery. She's making them more supportive than they probably were. Exactly. How did you know? Because I recognize the impulse to make the story more palatable, to soften the hard edges. Sarah paused. I've been fighting that urge in my own writing. It was true. Sarah's memoir had grown to over 100 pages, but she kept finding herself glossing over the most difficult parts. The night Emma cried herself to sleep because she was hungry. The morning Sarah considered leaving Emma with social services because she thought her daughter would be better off. The darkness that had nearly swallowed her whole. The hardest truths are often what readers need most, Catherine said gently. They're what makes the hope meaningful. That evening, Sarah opened her notebook to a fresh page and began writing the scene she'd been avoiding the night in the shelter when she'd seriously contemplated giving up. The words came slowly, painfully, but with the honesty that felt like Lansing a wound. Emma was at the small kitchen table, working on a science project about Colorado wildlife. She'd made friends at school, real friends who invited her to birthday parties and called to ask about homework. Watching her daughter regain her childhood was Sarah's greatest joy. "Mama," Emma said suddenly, "Mrs. Rodriguez wants to meet you." "Your teacher? Did something happen?" "No, silly. She wants to talk to you about my writing." Emma's eyes sparkled with pride. "She says I write like you, with feeling." The parent-teacher conference 2 days later revealed Emma had been writing stories during creative writing time, stories about brave girls who faced big challenges and found ways to overcome them. Mrs. Rodriguez, a warm woman with graying hair and laugh lines, showed Sarah Emma's latest story about a girl who lived in different houses but never lost her stuffed rabbit. "Emma has remarkable emotional intelligence for her age," Mrs. Rodriguez explained. "Her writing shows resilience and empathy that I rarely see in 8-year-olds. Has she experienced significant changes recently?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "We've had some challenges this year, but we're in a good place now." It shows in her work. She writes about difficulty but always finds the light. That's a gift. Driving home through Denver's early winter twilight, Sarah realized Emma had been processing their experiences through writing, just as Sarah had. The thought filled her with both pride and protective worry. "Do you like writing stories?" Sarah asked as they climbed the stairs to their apartment. "Yeah, it helps me understand things." Emma paused on the landing. "Like how being scared doesn't last forever." That night, Sarah wrote with renewed purpose. She wrote not just about their journey, but about the strength she'd discovered in Emma and in herself. About how sometimes the most important stories are the ones we never planned to tell. Spring arrived in Denver with the sudden intensity of mountain weather, one day gray and cold, the next brilliant with sunshine and the scent of blooming trees. Sarah had been at Walsh Literary Press for 6 months, and her memoir had grown into a complete manuscript of nearly 300 pages. "I think you're ready," Catherine announced on a morning in late April, holding Sarah's printed manuscript. "This is publication ready. The question is whether you're ready." Sarah's stomach lurched with excitement and terror. People would actually read it? People should read it. Your story, the honesty about homelessness, single motherhood, The way you've written about Emma's resilience, it's exactly what our society needs to hear right now. Catherine had already begun the preliminary work. She'd designed a striking cover featuring a photograph of Denver's skyline at dawn, with the title When Everything Falls, A Mother's Journey from Despair to Hope in Elegant Topography. The back cover featured a photo of Sarah and Emma taken in front of their brownstone, both of them smiling genuinely for the first time in years. There's something else, Catherine continued. I've been contacted by Rocky Mountain Public Radio. They want to interview local authors for their morning show. I recommended you. The radio interview was scheduled for the following week. Sarah spent days preparing, writing notes about key points she wanted to share. But when she sat across from host Jennifer Martinez in the KMPR studio, all her preparation fell away. So Sarah, tell us about the moment you realized you'd lost everything, Jennifer asked, her voice warm and professional. Sarah found herself speaking from the heart rather than her notes. She talked about the eviction notice, about Emma's worried eyes, about the crushing weight of feeling invisible. But she also talked about unexpected kindness, about the way communities could lift people up, about the strength she'd found in telling her story. The interview lasted 30 minutes, but Sarah felt like she'd been talking for days. As they wrapped up, Jennifer leaned forward with genuine interest. Where can people find your book when it's published? Walsh Literary Press will have it available this summer, Sarah replied, still amazed to be saying those words about her own book. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By the time Sarah returned to the office that afternoon, Catherine's phone was ringing constantly. Local bookstores wanted to know about ordering copies. A women's shelter called asking if Sarah would speak to their residents. Denver's public library system inquired about hosting a reading. I think we need to increase the print run, Catherine said with a smile that mixed excitement with concern. Are you prepared for this level of attention? Sarah wasn't sure anyone could be prepared, but she knew she was ready to try. That evening, she and Emma walked through their Capitol Hill neighborhood, past familiar coffee shops and bookstores, past the library where Catherine had first approached them. Mama, are you famous now? Emma asked with 9-year-old directness. Not famous, sweetheart. Just heard. I think that's better than famous, Emma decided after serious consideration. Famous people can't go to the grocery store without people bothering them. Sarah laughed, remembering why Emma's perspective always grounded her. You're absolutely right. But as they walked home, Sarah felt the weight of possibilities settling around her shoulders. Her story would soon belong to the world, carrying with it the hopes and struggles of everyone who'd ever lost everything and fought to rebuild. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. When Everything Falls was officially released on a Tuesday in July, Sarah held the first copy in her hands that morning, running her fingers over the smooth cover, hardly believing the book was real. Catherine had orchestrated a small launch event at the Tattered Cover bookstore in downtown Denver, Sarah's favorite bookstore from her former life. When buying books had been a casual pleasure rather than an impossible luxury, Emma sat in the front row, wearing her best dress and beaming with pride. Around them, folding chairs filled with an unexpected crowd, other parents from Emma's school, residents from the shelter where they'd stayed, Catherine's publishing contacts, and strangers who'd heard the radio interview. I never expected to write a memoir, Sarah began, her voice steadying as she spoke. This book happened because I needed to make sense of what felt senseless. But I'm sharing it because I've learned that our most difficult experiences often hold the keys to helping others. She read a passage about Emma's first day at the new school, about watching her daughter make friends while carrying the invisible weight of recent trauma. The audience listened with an intensity that reminded Sarah why storytelling mattered. During the signing afterward, Sarah met readers whose stories echoed her own in surprising ways. Maria, a divorced teacher, had spent 2 months living in her car with her teenage son after an abusive marriage ended. James, a veteran, described losing his apartment after medical bills depleted his savings. Each person who approached a signing table carried pieces of similar struggles. Reading your story made me feel less alone, Maria said, clutching her signed copy. I thought I was the only one who'd failed so completely. You didn't fail, Sarah replied, meeting her eyes. You survived. That's different. The weeks following the launch blurred together in ways Sarah had never imagined. Local news stations requested interviews. The book began appearing on bestseller lists at independent Colorado bookstores. Sarah received invitations to speak at conferences, shelters, and community organizations, but the most meaningful responses came in letters and emails from readers. A single father in Grand Junction wrote about how Sarah's story had given him hope during his own housing crisis. A college student shared how the book helped her understand her mother's struggles after their family lost their home to foreclosure. "Look at this," Catherine said one morning, showing Sarah an email on her computer screen. "It's from a social worker in Chicago. She wants to know if you'd consider speaking at a national conference on family homelessness." Sarah read the invitation with wonder. 6 months ago, she'd been invisible, one of thousands of people whose struggles went unnoticed. Now, her voice was reaching people across the country. "It's happening fast," Sarah said, feeling slightly overwhelmed. "Good stories have a way of doing that," Catherine replied. "But remember, you control the pace. You decide which opportunities align with your values and your family's needs." That evening, Sarah sat with Emma on their apartment's small balcony, watching the sunset paint Denver's sky in shades of rose and gold. Emma was reading a chapter book, her legs curled under her in the way that meant she was completely absorbed in the story. "Mama," Emma said suddenly, looking up from her book, "do you think our story is finished now?" Sarah considered the question. "Seriously, what do you think?" "I think the scary part is finished, but the good part is just starting." Sarah pulled her daughter closer, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the evening air. Emma was right. They'd survived the fall, found their footing, and discovered that their story had the power to help others. But this felt less like an ending and more like a beginning. The real question was, what would they build next? By autumn, when Everything Falls had sold over 10,000 copies, a remarkable success for a small press memoir, Sarah found herself traveling to speaking engagements across Colorado and neighboring states, sharing her story with audiences who saw their own struggles reflected in her words. But it was a conversation with Dr. Patricia Hernandez, director of Denver's Coalition for the Homeless, that sparked Sarah's next chapter. "Your book is opening conversations we've needed to have for years," Dr. Hernandez said over coffee near the Capitol. "But I keep wondering, what if we could channel this momentum into something more sustained? Something that helps families before they reach crisis?" The idea that emerged from their discussion was both simple and ambitious. A program that paired families at risk of homelessness with mentors who'd successfully navigated similar challenges. Not just financial assistance, but the kind of emotional support and practical guidance that Catherine had provided for Sarah. "We could call it the Bridge Project," Sarah suggested during a brainstorming session at Walsh Literary Press. "Because that's what people need, bridges between where they are and where they want to be." Catherine, ever the businesswoman, leaned forward with interest. "How would it work practically?" "Mentors would be people who've overcome housing instability, job loss, domestic violence, whatever crisis the family is facing. They'd meet regularly, help with job searches, provide emotional support, share resources. Most importantly, they'd prove that recovery is possible." Dr. Hernandez had connections with city officials and nonprofit organizations. Catherine knew potential funders through her publishing network. Sarah brought her story and growing platform. Within 3 months, they'd secured initial funding from the Denver Foundation and established partnerships with 5 local organizations. The first Bridge Project meeting took place in January, in a community room at the Capitol Hill Library, where Catherine had first approached Sarah and Emma. 12 families attended, paired with 12 mentors. Sarah watched nervously as people introduced themselves, wondering if the program would work in practice as well as it had in theory. "I'm Jennifer," said a woman about Sarah's age, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lost my job 3 months ago. My husband left right after. I have 2 kids and I don't know how to." She stopped, overwhelmed. Her mentor, Carlos, leaned forward with gentle understanding. "I was laid off 2 years ago when the construction company I worked for went under. My wife and I nearly lost our house. I know how terrifying it feels, but I also know there's a way through." Around the room, Similar conversations began. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she watched connections forming, tentative at first, then growing stronger as people recognized their shared experiences. Emma, now 9 and wise beyond her years, had insisted on attending the meeting. She'd set up a small area with books and coloring supplies for the other children, instinctively understanding that kids needed care too. "How did you know to do that?" Sarah asked her afterward. "Because I remember being scared and not having anything to do while you talked to grown-ups about scary stuff," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "Books always made me feel better." 6 months later, the Bridge Project had expanded to serve 50 families. Success stories began emerging. Jennifer found full-time work as a medical receptionist and moved into stable housing. Marcus, a veteran, struggling with PTSD and unemployment, connected with resources for both mental health support and job training. Lisa escaped an abusive relationship and successfully enrolled in community college, but Sarah's greatest joy came from watching Emma thrive in their new normal. Her daughter had started a writing club at school, encouraging classmates to tell their own stories. She volunteered at the Bridge Project meetings, reading to younger children while their parents worked with mentors. "You're raising an exceptional young woman," Dr. Hernandez told Sarah after one particularly successful meeting. "She has your heart for service, but also a wisdom that seems beyond her years." "She learned early that we all need each other," Sarah replied, watching Emma help a shy 6-year-old choose a picture book. "Sometimes I think our hardest experiences taught her the most important lessons." As winter turned to spring, Sarah began working on her second book, not another memoir, but a practical guide to family financial recovery. She wanted to capture not just the emotional journey of rebuilding, but the concrete steps families could take to stabilize their situations. The work felt like completing a circle that had begun in desperation and grown into purpose. 2 years after Sarah first held her published memoir, she stood before an audience at the Colorado Convention Center. The National Conference on Family Homelessness had invited her as a keynote speaker, but this time, she wasn't speaking alone. Emma, now 10 and poised beyond her years, stood beside her mother at the podium. They'd decided together that Emma should share her perspective, the child's experience of losing everything and finding hope again. "When I was 8, Emma began, her clear voice carrying across the packed auditorium, "I thought home was a place, but I learned that home is actually the people who love you, and you can carry that with you anywhere." The audience of social workers, policymakers, and advocates listened with rapt attention as Emma described what it felt like to be a child in crisis, but also what had helped her heal. Her words carried a weight that statistics and case studies couldn't match. Sarah watched her daughter with awe and pride. Emma had not just survived their darkest period, she'd emerged with empathy, resilience, and a desire to help others that rivaled adults twice her age. "My mom always tells our story," Emma continued, "but kids have stories too, and sometimes we understand things differently than grown-ups do." After their presentation, they were surrounded by conference attendees. A policy researcher from Washington, D.C., wanted to discuss incorporating children's perspectives into family services. A documentary filmmaker asked about following families in the Bridge Project. A publisher inquired about Emma possibly writing a children's book about resilience, but the most meaningful conversation came from a quiet woman who approached them as the crowd thinned. "My name is Rita," she said, her voice shaky with emotion. "I read your book 2 months ago when my family was living in our car. Your story, it gave me hope when I didn't think hope was possible anymore." "Where are you now?" Sarah asked gently. "We found an apartment last week. A small one, but it's ours. And I started volunteering at our local shelter because I want to help families like yours help me." This, Sarah realized, was what she'd unknowingly been working toward, not just her own recovery, but creating ripples of healing that spread far beyond her original story. Back in Denver that evening, Sarah and Emma sat in their favorite corner booth at Beacon Books and Brew, sharing a slice of chocolate cake and processing the day. Catherine joined them after closing the press office, sliding into the booth with a satisfied smile. "I have news," Catherine announced. "The Bridge Project has been selected for a major federal grant. We'll be able to expand to 5 more cities next year. Emma clapped with excitement, but Sarah felt a moment of overwhelm. Are we ready for that kind of growth? The question isn't whether we're ready, Catherine replied wisely. It's whether families in those cities need what we're offering. And I think we all know the answer to that. Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Sarah sat at her desk working on her third book, a collection of stories from Bridge Project families who'd agreed to share their journeys. Each story was different, but threaded through them all were themes of resilience, community, and the transformative power of being truly seen by another person. She paused to look out the window at Denver's nighttime skyline, remembering the view from their old apartment on the night everything fell apart. The city looked the same, but Sarah's place in it had transformed completely. She was no longer someone struggling to survive, she was someone helping others thrive. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma's teacher. Emma's essay about helping others won the school writing contest. She wants to donate the prize money to the Bridge Project. Thought you'd want to know. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with the kind of pride that had nothing to do with achievement and everything to do with character. Emma hadn't just recovered from their trauma, she'd transformed it into a force for good. Outside, Denver slept under a canopy of stars, unaware that in a small apartment above a literary press, 2 people who'd once lost everything were planning how to give even more away. Some stories, Sarah reflected as she closed her laptop, don't really end. They just keep beginning, over and over again, each chapter creating space for new chapters in other people's lives, and that, she thought, was the most unbelievable part of all.